Some believe in eating anything, while the weak eat only vegetables. My wife does not particularly like that passage. She keeps a vegetarian diet for the most part. Every now and again there's an egg on the plate. Every now and again there's 2 eggs. Sometimes tuna fish, sometimes salmon shows up. Sometimes whitefish, sometimes bluefish. And I asked her once, you keep vegetarian, but yet from time to time you will eat predators. What do fish eat? Other fish, shrimp, the animals of the sea, all the rest of it. And she said, do not think me weak. Think yourself lucky I am of a forgiving mind. I told her I was going to preach that today, and she said she wasn't going to come. So you'll all have to bear witness that I did so, right? Anyhow, today is a funny Sunday in the life of the lectionary that we read, and a blessing to have today that we celebrate this church's homecoming Sunday. For it tells an interesting story. We continue the passage from Exodus where the slaves in Egypt are led and lead themselves and get themselves out of slavery, and God destroys the army sent to drive them back into it. A strange tale to tell at a homecoming, since it is by very definition a leave-taking with great purpose. Violence on all sides, violence in the water, violence in the chariots, violence from the heavens, and freedom on the road, and freedom the other side of the sea, freedom in the mountains, and freedom in the land to come. A text, a passage that is all about leaving a place that is no longer fit to stay and getting to a place where we belong, or that we will make our own even if we don't belong. And then on the other side, from Paul and from the gospel, we hear, in essence, rules of how we should behave at home. And I always found it strange that the rules are so generous this time, but it is the blessings of our faith that they are. Welcome those who are weak. Despise not those who abstain. Do not judge one another. Don't condemn people because they have a different way of seeing, believing, practicing than you do, or than I do, or than we do. That is not the hardest thing to do, now is it? I mean, it's far easier to be a person that looks on others and says, now why does she have to do it that way? Or why can't he learn to pray properly? Why don't that one read the way I like? Why can't that one sing on pitch? Why does that one always got to be hounding me for money? Why is this one always critical about how I raise my child? Why does this one not like the way I talk to my mama? You know what that woman was like when I was a boy? Or a girl. How come people just can't live right? It's easy to condemn others, isn't it not? It's hard to look at the face in the mirror and say, now you could have maybe lived a different way yesterday. Last night maybe didn't have to be what last night was. What you remember of it. Today can be better than yesterday, but of course it's always harder to be critical of the face in the mirror than to somebody else who's doing it wrong. And beneath and below and founding all these rules about how Paul is trying to help these new people in faith learn a different way of behaving with each other is that fundamental understanding of respect. The R-E-S-P-E-C-T, found out what it means to me and to all of us, because we do not live to ourselves and we do not die to ourselves. We live in the Lord, and the Lord doesn't have time for condemnatory people. He'll take care of that on his own. If you want to find out how, ask the Egyptian army. Oh, you can't. They all drowned in the sea because he did not like their particular way of chasing down slaves to bring them back to slavery. He was in favor of freedom and letting the people go. So if you want to know if the Lord takes issue with those who do ill, look no further than the book of Exodus to find out how. So we, though we may hold ourselves to high standards and each other to high standards, must at all times be generous. I didn't have to make a joke about my wife's diet. She didn't have to make a joke about my need to eat pigs every day or most days. We learn to get along and learn to try to find a respect to each other's choice and difference. Though my food tastes better than hers is more moral for the earth. I accept this and look at the man in the mirror and say, you could be less of a man, as you might say, if you ate as she does. Give it a try one day and you will see where you go. So respect, having a generous spirit, being people who overflow with forgiveness and with love. That's what Jesus is on about when he talks to Peter and tries to answer a question. Now, as we know, the Gospels are written long after Jesus is around, and there were no churches when Jesus walked the earth, and so Peter is giving voice to those questions that the people that made churches in the early days began to ask, but their question is no less real for that, and no more pertinent than it is now, just as fitting. How many times should I forgive someone who offends me, or sins against me, even say? 77 times, he says. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is not a charge to keep a 77-line ticker with people, right? Everybody got a name on it like a bingo card, and I've forgiven you once. Okay, you're down to 76. Oh, got to do it again, 75. Keep on going. One a year, and if we round our whole lives long, you're going to be to 76 years old or 78 years old. My mistake, math never my strong subject. And we're all out of forgiveness for you. That's it. It doesn't mean that. And you know it doesn't mean that, and it's a funny joke, but I hope it's funny. But there we have it. What it means is we must be the kind of people who forgive. Doesn't always mean that we allow behavior that is negative. We don't do that. There's no cause to do that, right? Behavior that offends, that hurts, that damages, violence, abuse, whatever it may be, selfishness, greed, and all the other things which afflict and damage each of us and all of us, they are not things that Jesus says, oh, just roll over, it'll be all right. No. But we forgive. And we forgive for two reasons. And the parable shows it most of all. Hey, if we don't, Lord help us when judgment day comes. If the Lord looks us in the eye and sees the people who were freed from the burdens of sin and death chose to be harsh with one another, his forgiving nature appears to be on the wane at those times. So there's that. But more importantly, it's because of what forgiveness, what generosity does for us and for all. A friend of mine, as we were talking as priests getting ready for today's sermon, said, now how do you expect that fella in prison was supposed to pay all that money back? He owed 10,000 talents. That's roughly the cost of a Navy destroyer in ancient money. It was a phenomenal, astronomical amount of money. I don't know what the guy had done to have to owe that much money back to somebody, but he was never going to be able to pay that kind of debt. It's ridiculous. And he's sure not going to be able to pay that debt if he's locked in prison being tortured till somehow he empties his pockets and the Navy destroyer's worth of coins falls out and he can turn it back over. Never going to happen. And so the man who loaned him the money doesn't expect it back, really. That's why he could forgive it with one condition, right? One condition. And it's the condition that we are charged with by the man who died and rose for us. Go forth and do likewise. Go forth and do likewise. Be forgiving to those who have wronged you. Don't accept the wrong that is done and challenge it and make it stop as best you can. But don't hold the bitterness of vengeance in your hearts and the self-righteousness that turns into pride that says they've done me wrong, I'm going to do them worse. Have a generous nature, be not bitter at heart. Now that isn't always easy. There are people we find it hard to forgive, right? Teacher who wouldn't take an assignment 1 hour late. The parent who wouldn't listen to while we were 1 hour late. The child who will not understand how the house is to be run and just seems to always want to push a button, right? The cop who stops us when we shouldn't be at any reason at all, gives a ticket when we weren't really going that fast at all, or worse, far worse, as many of you know. The law, which is unforgiving. The debts which will not be forgiven, and those who hold them seem to profit from our misery. There are many, many people in our lives with whom and for whom we could have bitterness at heart. Vow vengeance in the end, but the one who suffers when we hold ourselves in that spirit is us inside. And like the slave who was forgiven but would not himself forgive, we may do more harm in the world, self-righteous though we are, when we are not generous of heart or of spirit. The Lord, as Exodus shows us, has ways of taking care of things in the grand scheme of settling justice across time. Our charge, I am convinced, is to be people that hold with justice absolutely, but even more so as people of Christ with mercy. That we shed light and joy into a world which doesn't always shine it back. That we shed generosity to a world that is mean. Comfort to a world that is hard and bitter. Mercy, especially when there is none. The people of God throughout the 2,000 years that we have been a church, and the 141 some years this place has been a parish, know what it's like to be on the receiving end of bitterness and wrong. And we've also learned over time what it means and what it's like and how much it builds us up to meet that bitterness and wrong with a hand that says stop and a heart that says be at peace. Let us find a new way to be people of God's love, God's mercy, and God's truth, however that may be. May this day be a blessing, a blessed homecoming for all this parish family and those who were dear to it, in memory of those gone on, in anticipation of those yet to come, and worship the Lord in these walls. And may our spirit be a spirit of generosity and grace this day and all the days of our lives. Amen. Amen.